Before we go live, so this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. The recording of the meeting will remain online for 4 years, and if you are present in this chamber, you are consenting to appearing in the recording and broadcast, which may also be used for training purposes. Councillor Lauren? So, as I've just said, welcome to Overview and Scrutiny. What we'll do, first of all, because we've got new members here, is to go around the room and introduce ourselves. That's also helpful too for people who are watching online. Okay, so I don't mind which way we go. So I'm Andrew Brevels, I'm an Abbeydale councillor and I chair this committee. On my left.
Danny Maggs, Democratic Services.
It's Stephanie Chambers, councillor in Quedgley.
Linda Castle, councillor for Long Levens.
Terry Pullen, councillor for Moorland.
Angela Conda, councillor for Kingsholm and Wootton.
Karen James, councillor for Kingsway.
Kate Highland, councillor for Abbeymead.
Luke Shervey, the Cabinet Member for Housing.
Andy Hearn, the Head of Place for Gloucester City Council. Alistair Chambers, Councillor for Matson, Robins, Wood and White City.
Anne Radley, one of the Elmbridge councillors.
Okay, Louise Walker, councillor for Abbeydale.
Lauren Richards, Democratic Services.
And Shazia Dyer, legal advisor to the committee.
Okay, thanks everybody for that. So going on to the agenda proper. Lauren, who have we got apologies from, please?
It's just Councillor Bell this evening, Chair, and Councillor Chambers is substituting.
Okay, thanks for that. Declarations of interest, 0, that haven't been recorded already. Is that right? Declaration of party whipping. Any declarations of party whipping people want to comment on? Take it that is no, and there's no party whipping. Is that correct? Take that as read. Okay, minutes of the last meeting. Is it okay if I sign those as a true record, please? All those in favour, please show. Okay, any against? No, that's fine. Public question time. 0 members of the public here today. And petitions and deputations. Any petitions or deputations? Nope. In that case, straight into the agenda, which is the report, I think, from Luke, from you. So if you'd just like to briefly introduce it, please, that gives us more time for questions and comments. If that's okay, please. Thanks.
Yeah, not a problem. So this report is an update on how the programme is progressing so far. In November 2023, the former Cabinet and Council approved the formation of the programme and the funding of up to £5 million in borrowing to secure additional properties for use as temporary accommodation. At the time, and I believe it's still the case, it has cross-party support at full council. When appointed to the Cabinet, I requested an updated report on the progress of this programme, which you've all have in front of you. In addition to the report, you'll also have photographs of the quality of the accommodation that we're providing via this programme. Some highlights in the report. At the time of the original report, the council owned 3 properties, and we now have an additional 19 properties, of which 8 properties are occupied by 12 households. It's 12 households instead of just 8, because there's a HMO, which is accommodating 5 households in sort of 1. The budget for the project was £5 million funded through borrowing, which you would have seen in the budget and the money plan at the previous council meeting. To date, we have spent £4.45 million on purchases and £345,000 on refurbishments. This gives us approximately 8% refurb costs on the project. The savings are predicted to be £20,000 a year per property, over using sort of bed and breakfasts and hotels. One thing we have also been able to do is dip into the LAF funding, which is the Local Government Housing Fund. That's been made available in 3 different funding rounds, and we're currently on the end of the 3rd funding round, which has been extended. The total grant funding sits at 1.7 million. By utilising that funding, we've also been able to make savings on stamp duty of £110,000. With the additional grant funding, it takes the project spend to approximately 6 million. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
That's quick. Thank you. Well done. Councillor Ilis for Chambers.
Thank you. With regards to the housing benefit that's able to be used on the properties, is that able to be used against the costs of the hotels?
The housing benefit is the local housing allowance. So yes, it can be used in line with the hotels. One of the problems with that is that you can only get the 1 room rate for hotels. So if you have a family of 4, you might have a couple and then 2 kids. That will be 2 separate rooms because you can't just have 1 room. Whereas if we're able to house them in a 2-bed, 3-bed house, we can get the additional rate. So it'll be like a 2-bed rate would be a lot more than the 1-bed or 3-bed. So we're able to claim more essentially. Hotels also being only able to claim the 1-bed rate or shared accommodation rate possibly is obviously B&Bs cost what, £50, £100 a night, and if we're only getting sort of £120 a week, all of a sudden that's where the costs really start to ramp up. But by putting them into houses that we own, we take that completely out of the equation.
Thank you for clarifying. That's great. With regards to bed and breakfasts, obviously, if they're in the house, they can cook breakfast and use an oven and whatnot. If they're in a hotel, do they get allowance for food? Because obviously they can't cook and it's eating out. It's going to be a lot more than obviously eating in if you had your house. So is there an allowance for that from the City Council?
No, there isn't. We do have food bank vouchers, unfortunately. We have to use them. That would be the sort of allowance, if you want to put it that way, that we'd get from the City Council. We are able to put in support, whether it's through sort of the CYMCA, to assist them. But yeah, B&Bs, they're not great. They're awful when it comes to housing temporary people.
Thank you for that. So that's quite alarming, really, because the cost, obviously, for eating out, and obviously they can't eat in, if they've got takeaway or sit out, is substantially a lot higher than feeding a family that you would do, obviously, as you're aware and everyone else is aware. That said, is there any shared kitchens or anything that they can use, that the City Council can use, that they've got access to? And if not, with regards to the food bank vouchers, is that literally just when people give free food, they can get vouchers for those free food? Because if it is, it's always the same. It's always sweet corn, spam, and there's no variety, there's no health. So it's like health inequalities for the people in hotels. And the final thing to go with that is, what's the average time somebody spends in a hotel? Because if it's more than a week, that's quite concerning, because that would be financially add more strain on the families, especially if there's 2 adults and 2 children. Sorry for grouping them together, but I think it's quite relevant. Do you want me to run over them again, or have you got that? Shared kitchen, food vouchers, if it is literally just the free food people hand in, or if there's a stock of milk, bread, cheese, butter that the City Council provide, and they can come and get an allowance for food that people could use. And the final part of that question is, how long is the average time a family would spend in a B&B before being allocated a property, from best case to worst case to the mean? Thank you.
Okay, so the shared kitchens, it very much depends on what accommodation they're in. So if they're in sort of HMO, then yes, there'll be shared facilities. If they're in a bed and breakfast, no. We have previously used bed and breakfast sort of hotel accommodation, which is sort of a bit more targeted, I suppose, for use as temporary accommodation, which does have those shared facilities, but that's sort of not the norm. The norm would unfortunately be the usual type of temporary accommodation, hotel accommodation, sorry. Food bank vouchers, again, yes, it's the ones I always see in Tesco's, that same sort of stuff going in there. And it's not fantastic when there's not great cooking facilities, so it does make it harder. The time in B&B, I can't really give you an answer to that. Firstly, I haven't got the exact stat in front of me. But secondly, it very much depends on the household and what sort of accommodation they're in and when they approach us as to what sort of stage they are going through their homeless application. As a general rule, there should be no families in bed and breakfast accommodation over 6 weeks, and that is currently the case, and it has been for quite a while. Singles, they take up quite a lot of the hotel accommodation, and that's what we're trying to get down. But your exact timings on the time in B&B, I don't have that in front, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. So Howard, you had a few questions thinking about it. There were quite a few. So do you want to do them in batches of 2? Is that okay? We had a pre-meeting before we started.
Yeah,
It's okay, take 2 together, give the cabinet member a chance. Excuse me, and then come back with the other 2, the rest. Is that okay?
Yeah, some of them are simple, so if I could go through one at a time. and
Yeah,
then
no,
let me
sure, okay,
finish.
that's fine.
Yeah, okay. Right. The first question is, much mention is made of providing temporary accommodation for families. Quite right. However, there are too many single homeless. Are they receiving the same support? And what is the current number of known single homeless?
So when it comes to singles, the figure that I've got for those in temporary accommodation is 79. This is a little bit out of date in the sense that it's from the end of February, and I haven't quite got the update for sort of the end of March as yet, because of annual leave hasn't come through. Singles do get the same treatment, but what it comes down to is whether they got a priority need. So there's a catalogue of reasons why somebody might have a priority need. It's not necessarily just the fact that there's children in the room. So it may be whether there's sort of mental health issues or physical illnesses. So there's a number of reasons why single people also get housed. So yes, in the sense of having a priority need, if they have one, they get exactly the same treatment.
Thank you for that. My second question is, how likely is it we would keep to the £5 million figure for acquisitions? Is there a possibility of an overspend? Is there any prediction for an underspend?
We're on target to spend the 5 million and stay within that bracket. There's 2 further properties that are just currently going through conveyancing, and we have put in a claim for additional LAF funding to hopefully get some more. So with a mixture of grant funding and the borrowing, yes, we are sort of hitting it on the head. So yeah.
Next question is, when providing temporary accommodation, do we just use mainly Gloucester City Homes, or do we also use private landlords? And if we do use private landlords, what inspections of the properties are carried out?
Yeah, we use a mix. Predominantly it was Gloucester City Homes, purely because they're the biggest housing provider. So it sort of makes sense going to them. And they still manage some properties. So with this project, we we do own these properties. We then have use of dispersed accommodation, which would be through housing providers, and then we'll also have the private sector, which we'll be looking at. In addition to that, you have sort of the more voluntary sector and also supported housing. So CYMCA manage lots of our properties, and they've also got properties that they sort of rent to us through that. So it is a big mix. It's not just looking at private sector. You did mention about whether we inspect them. They are inspected, they are licensed, all the ones that we use.
Thank you. In section 5.5, page 20, how are we getting on with the installation of the solar panels on one of the properties?
So the solar panels were, if we're able to get any additional grant funding, and if the accommodation needs it, we would look at putting in solar panels. It's not on the cards as such. It's visionary, I suppose, is probably the better way to put it. So we'd like to add them if it provides added value. But at the moment, it's just a sort of thought process. But there's no sort of funding allocated for it as yet. We're hoping it might come if we get any grant funding.
Because I understood from the report that there was consideration being given to putting solar panels on that property. So I was just wondering how it was going.
Yeah, very much early days. Not much more than just consideration.
My next question is, what is the progress on the filling of all the properties?
All of the properties that are ready are currently being used. The ones that are empty are currently going through conveyancing, or they are being refurbed. So as soon as they are ready, they are used. There's no sort of stopgap.
And following on from Councillor Chambers' question on hotels, how many are being used for temporary accommodation, and will we stay within the budget that you set?
So the number in hotels, total number of households in bed and breakfast is 49. Total number of singles is 39. Total number of families is 10. So that's the ones in sort of hotels, B&B accommodation. The funding question, I think I've answered that. Yes, we'll stay within the budget.
And you'll be pleased to know my final question is there sufficient disability accommodation that is reasonable to be provided? Or can some properties actually be adapted once people move in if they require it?
So we have a duty of care for anybody that we need to accommodate. So one of those things is whether it's suitable for them. So suitability for housing, we will ensure that it is suitable for them. However, there are possibly some times when it may not immediately be suitable, and that's based on the fact that if they are in an emergency situation and we just need to put them somewhere and then maybe move them somewhere more suitable at maybe the next day, there will be that sort of way into more suitable accommodation. But yes, when it comes to sort of wheelchair users, we'll always have to take that into consideration and house them somewhere suitable. One of the properties that we're currently using does have a vulnerable disabled family in there. So yes.
Thank you for answering all my questions. That's me done, Chair.
That's really good. Thank you both. Councillor Stephanie Chambers.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the explanation of the report. as we've sort of I've mentioned before and we've discussed, the one thing that I'm really passionate about is this sort of human value. And you mentioned the duty of care we have to people living in temporary accommodation. There's so much surrounding that, but obviously I mentioned previously there was a report in January linking at least 74 child deaths to living in temporary accommodation across the country, not obviously locally. What work is being done? I know we spoke about some work, and what support is given for obviously there are singles like Howard mentioned in temporary accommodation, but for the families, because I think there's a lot that happens for a children's lifetime. You know, there's a much higher chance that they'll end up living in temporary accommodation when they're older. Their education is damaged by living in temporary accommodation. So firstly, one of the things I wanted to know is, are we providing internet? Because people can't do contracts really quickly in and out of temporary accommodation, because even small primary school children's homework now is online. So that's a really vital thing for the children to keep up with their education. But mainly, what support is given? What information do we give people when they come into temporary accommodation that can help them, particularly with if they're not in somewhere with a washing machine, where the laundrettes are, how to keep, live amongst other people. And I know we have providers, but I think we need to take ownership of what happens there. So that's my first question.
Yeah, thank you. So one thing I've tried to push forward with is to create more of a sort of trauma-informed approach. And I understand most of the housing team have now gone on that training, which I've also done. So it's trying to understand people's when people get into these sort of situations, learning and understanding how we can sort of treat them in a more sort of humane way to stop that revolving door that I think you're sort of alluding to. I don't know about any internet access. I know there's social tariffs they can get, but I don't know if we provide that directly, or whether there's any sort of grant funding that we can sort of apply for. I'd have to find that bit of information out, I'm afraid. So yes, I can't really answer that question directly without.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's just they can't, when they've got loads of things to sort out, sorting out internet on a short contract would be probably just one bit too much. The other thing is, we obviously had lots of discussions about the disposal of those 2 properties, should that become available, and I'm really happy they're being used. What will be the threshold of deciding if they're disposed of? Will you bring that back to ONS, or how will you know if somebody's going to pop up in 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time? What sort of timescale are you going to wait before you dispose of those properties?
So we've left that very much up to sort of an officer decision as to when it might be appropriate. 'Cause, although we won't know who's going to come through the door, it's not that as soon as those properties are empty, we're going to put them on the market. I think when they do go on the market for sale, I think it would be more around that we see a trend change, sort of maybe nationally, or definitely locally. So it's not that they'll be the very first ones to go, because I think that would be rather silly to let them go unnecessarily. We've said that we're happy to keep hold of them for as long as they're needed. So if they are continuing to be needed as they are now, we'll keep them. But I can't see us putting them on the market anytime soon.
Thank you, that's really good to know, because, yeah, it doesn't look like it's getting any better anytime soon at the moment, the situation. And my last question that I might just have to refer to Shazia on, just to check the legalities of it, because it could be a rumour and I don't want to say something that isn't true. So I'd heard that we were looking... What do you want me to do, Shazia? Shall I mention it? How shall I do it? A property in Stroud that we were looking at doing some joint work with Stroud on. And now that's not happening. Were there discussions on a property in Stroud for temporary accommodation?
Yes, there was talk about doing a joint venture with Stroud. I always get the name of the building wrong, so I won't say it because it's bound to be wrong. with that, we were looking at taking on certain parts of the building, and there was two caveats that I sort of put in place as to whether we'd sort of go forward with it, and that was that it would have to be financially viable for us to do it, and it would also have to provide better accommodation than we can provide currently within the city boundaries. My personal view is that we shouldn't sort of outsource homelessness to outside of the city boundaries. So I wasn't overly keen on doing it unless it ticked those sort of two boxes. And my understanding is that it didn't financially stack up. In part, I believe it was because of housing benefit rates. We couldn't achieve the same amount because of some rules. So it financially didn't stack up.
Just one really quick final question. We've obviously just had the Cheltenham races. You said we had about 10 families in hotels at the moment and numerous singles. Did we have to move those families because of the races again? Were they put out of county or out of city boundaries?
I'm not sure if we had to move them. I would almost certainly say that some would have had to have moved. The Cheltenham races cause a problem across the whole of the county, not just Gloucester. And talking about temporary accommodation, when it comes to Cheltenham races and other similar events, it massively inflates the accommodation costs. So then the temporary accommodation they might have been in, all of a sudden it's costing £100 extra a night, even if they have to sort of go further afield. I can probably find that bit of information out if you wanted that.
Yeah, that'd be good, thank you.
So we just continue down this side of the chamber. Everybody's got their hands up.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. It's really interesting actually seeing photographs of the houses and what they look like inside. They look lovely. I just wonder, when you get a person that has got a disability, you sort of touched on it slightly, how quickly can you adapt a home for when a person comes in with needs that aren't already provided in the house? How long does it take?
There you go. Yeah, so adapting a property is it's not quite as straightforward as just bringing a property and then all of a sudden there's a wheelchair user and we're going to adapt that property. There are different sort of size standards for one, if it's going to be a new build or anything else, and sort of the width of the doors. And sort of there's turning circles that you need sort of in bathrooms. There might need to be a wet room, and most properties have baths. So there's all those sort of factors that would be at play. So when it comes to adapting a property, that's not really an easy one to do, or an easy question to answer, to be fair. But we have adapted one property for that vulnerable family, but I'm not sure how easy it would be.
So would it be, if you've adapted a house for a disabled person, and then the person in that house no longer needs it to be adapted, would you then move that couple out of the family, out of the house, and then to accommodate the disabled family? Is that how it works?
So the homeless pathway, so somebody might come in, present as homeless to us. They would move through sort of prevention through to relief, and then we may, at the relief stage, put them into that temporary accommodation that you're sort of referring to. It is just temporary accommodation. So if they are eligible and qualifying, and we're able to accept a main duty to them, they would be given that additional gold banding. And essentially that property would be available for them until a suitable property comes available. So as soon as one does, then that's the sort of pathway out into permanent accommodation. And then we would obviously have that adapted property ready for the next person that might need it.
Thank you, Chair. The question is related to the question that Councillor Steph Chambers asked a few minutes ago. Point 3.21 talks about in the event of two properties currently being used on an interim basis are no longer needed for that purpose, the intention is to dispose of the property. Surely, and rather sadly, unless things change very, very quickly, there is likely in this city always to be a need for families seeking emergency accommodation. So I'm just a little bit concerned as to why you would want to dispose of property which can be used for family accommodation.
I think we've said before that we're not looking at disposing of the properties if they're being used and if they're needed. So as long as they are needed, we're keeping them.
Okay, but should that situation occur, then shouldn't the property be reverted back to the purpose that it was originally required or originally specified? I mean, there's got to be a good reason not to sell properties that the council own for as long as we have a housing crisis in Gloucester, and to be used for whatever way in attempting to solve that issue. Surely it's better to keep properties and use them for an alternative rather than sell them.
Yes, we'd always want to keep properties for if they're needed and for the purpose that they were purchased for to start with, which was temporary accommodation. Part of the problem with properties is that they're large, so you've got the sort of financial element of sort of who you can sort of put in there. But one of the perks of them being so large is that they're ideal for adaptations, which somebody is currently in there is in need of those adaptations. So they are being utilised, and they're being utilised in the most effective way at the moment. But yeah, go back to we wouldn't sell any properties that are needed, and like I said, I can't see them not being needed in the near future. However, they were going to be converted to HMOs, which this administration has said that we would not do. But I think we've got the best outcome at the moment, given that they're being used for disabled family.
Angela?
Thank you, Chair. My question follows on, really. Is it possible to put a stipulation in somehow to say that in the very remote occasion that you do decide to dispose of these properties, that they are offered, that GCH, for example, is offered first refusal, in that we spent a large amount of money preparing them for occupation, that they shouldn't be put on the open market, but that they should almost, stay within the purview of the council, even if it's that they're managed by GCH, if that eventuality ever came to pass.
That is one possibility. They could be changed into social housing. Putting them on the open market would have a duty to get best value for the taxpayer. So whether we'll be able to put any stipulation on there that would then undermine that best value, I'm not sure. There'll probably be a legal position on that we wouldn't be able to do. But the GCH idea, if we were to dispose of them, would be a possibility. I don't know how their financial model sort of works on taking those types of properties on board, but it's certainly something that we'd look into.
Thank you, that's all.
Thanks. Councillor James? Any questions? Okay. Councillor Hyland?
Just where you've put about the family temporary accommodations may be provided unfurnished, so that they can use their own furniture and things like that. If they haven't got their own, is it then provided furnished? And also just with that as well, where it says about securing storage space, is that then funded by the council, or are the families expected to pay for that themselves?
Yes, so the properties can come furnished or unfurnished. The ones that come furnished can come sort of enhanced furnished, I suppose. That can come sort of with bedding, crockery, sort of the whole sort of 9 yards, or it can just be a sofa. So it's sort of a range of furnishings that could possibly be there. Along with needing to have to accommodate people, we'd also have a duty over their belongings. So we'd have to put those into storage. There is a cost to that, and generally it's recharged back to the tenant. I don't know the exact rate, but it's a small fee.
Okay, Shazia would like to come in and comment on that.
So, sorry, it was the previous question about disposal. So it was just to say, in the report that went in November 23, the legal comment does state that any disposal would need Secretary of State consent. So actually that, again, those are the options that we'd have to look at, and you're more likely to get consent if it is being used for the purpose for which it was acquired. We'll also have some grant conditions about what we can actually do and whether or not we'd have to repay it if it was used for a different purpose. So, you know, there are safeguards in the whole process already.
Anybody else? Sorry, yeah, Anne.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are regarding the support that's provided. Now, we've got quite a broad range of sort of potentially individuals and families. What are the organisations that are providing support for some of those families and some of those individuals?
In particular, when it comes to the temporary accommodation, it's the CYMCA that provide that support.
Is that the only organisation that we sort of work with on that?
So these particular accommodation that is in the report, it's CYMCA. More broadly, the temporary accommodation, whether it's through Gloucester City Homes, they have their own homeless team who offer that support. So it very much depends on where they are. But in regards to these properties, it's the CYMCA.
That's quite interesting because it's quite a broad range. Like in the report, it talks about resettling families from Afghanistan and other areas. So that seems quite a narrow focus. I'd be very interested as well in the qualifications and training that's provided to those support workers, because to do that support and to do it properly, to give people a good foundation to actually move on, is very skillful. And from the experience I've had with contact with people who are providing that support in temporary accommodation, you get some very passionate, committed individuals, but often there's a bit of a disconnect between the support they can draw on within their local areas to help them do a good job. So I'd like to know what quality standards we're putting in place so those providers know that they need to adequately train and support their staff, and also what are we doing to make sure those staff are connected to those local networks that will help them do a good job.
So I had a presentation from the CYMCA, and they talked me through everything that they're sort of offering. So a way of not answering your question, but whether it would be a good idea to invite the CYMCA to talk to this committee about what they're doing in the city, and in particular with our temporary accommodation, because I think they'll probably do a lot better job of explaining it than I would. So I'm sure you can probably invite them, and they'll be up for that.
Yeah, of course.
Just to give a little bit of information, when a couple of years ago, CYMCA merged with a specific family-orientated charity that did lots of work around families, day work and support work. So I think they do have the expertise there. Because when they did the merge, I met both companies.
Okay, thanks, that's helpful. Anne, any more questions?
Yeah, I'd just like to sort of think, I like that as a suggestion, because the role of those support workers is absolutely pivotal in moving people forward, and I'd feel much more contented to understand a bit more about the training and support they receive, because we're paying for it, and that's
critical in helping moving people on. So as a suggestion has been made, if it could be considered, Chair.
Look at that. Okay, so before we go around for a second time.
got a question.
Oh, sorry, Louise.
I see the report notes that demand continues to increase for temporary accommodation. I just wondered, do you record any data at all as to the reasons why people are presenting homeless? I think it just would be interesting to see, of course, an anonymised report, perhaps shedding some light on what the root causes are, to see if there was anything that could be done to tackle those.
Yes, so the whole sort of journey of homelessness is recorded. So it's national statistics as well, which is done through the it's called the H-Click. No idea what it stands for, but that's what it's called. And yes, so when they if somebody comes through, yes, it gets recorded as to the reason for approach, sort of all of the family makeup. It also look into their sort of support needs. And all of this is sort of recorded as sort of the journey, going through the prevention stage into the relief, into the sort of final duty where we look at accommodating them in permanent accommodation. So yes, there is an avenue of information out there that we can report on.
But it just might be useful perhaps to see some sort of overall summary, just saying percentages or numbers, saying these are what some of the general causes are. Is it rents going up, family breakdown or something? Just perhaps an overall summary at some point instead of having to perhaps try and find the data out from somewhere.
I can probably get you would you like the top 5 reasons for homelessness in the city? Something like that. I can get you that. That's fine.
There is anything else?
That's it, thank you,
Okay,
Chair.
cool. Vice Chair?
Thank you. My question is about the time people spend living in these temporary homes. Yeah, obviously there is going to be more sort of 2 or 3 bedroom houses which are available through housing associations and private landlords for a more permanent solution for people to move on to. But for the people who need the particularly large houses, or for individuals, where again we know that there is a shortage of decent accommodation, the time that they might need that temporary accommodation could be an awful lot longer, potentially running into a year or more. Do we actually have a limit on the amount of time that they can stay, or is it a case that once they are in this accommodation, that is where they stay until they get allocated something else?
So when people come in, so if they have a priority need, and we'd have a duty to house them, officers would then investigate that homelessness. And if they are found to be intentionally homeless, then that's when the temporary accommodation might sort of drop off. And then that's when we might have to do a referral to social services or sort of another avenue. If they are not intentionally homeless, then that and they get accepted as homeless, which is accepted the full duty, so we've accepted the legal duty to rehouse them. That accommodation is then theirs until they get housed into permanent accommodation. It can sort of drop off slightly if, for example, if they dramatically change their situation during that time, but generally speaking, it will always be theirs until they get permanently housed.
Okay, so 2 questions from me, please, just very easy, short questions. So, excuse me, I was looking at the part of the report which talks about the financial implications, which talks about each acquisition be considered on a case-by-case basis to ensure that the relevant costs are taken into account when looking at the City Council's budget. Are you able to give us any information on what the overall saving is likely to be during the current financial year? I looked in the report for that, but I couldn't find any. That's my first question. Thanks.
The simple answer is no. The cost savings, it's difficult to put a sort of exact figure on it or to forecast it. So it's generally been worked out by the finance team that the savings will be £20,000 per year per property. There's lots of variables in that, whether it's sort of general costs going up, which then, or repairs that we need to do. And it also depends on what sort of size family we put into those properties as to what housing benefits we might be able to claim, if they're working or if they're not working. So there's a few different variables, but the finance team said it'll be £20,000 per year per property saving over putting that same household into sort of temporary accommodation, hotel style accommodation, which again has that variable effect. If it's like the Cheltenham races, you know, it gets a lot more expensive. But 20,000 per year per property is what I've been told.
Okay, excuse me again. So I'm not quite sure I followed that. So are you saying that there's a figure of, did you say £6,000, £20,000 per property that you hope to save? But presumably somebody is doing the calculations throughout the year and is able to say, okay, this is what we anticipated saving based on all the costs, the expenditure, acquisition, interest costs, and so on. And this is where we are at the moment. Presumably somebody at some point, if they're not doing it already, would do that to know that the capital budget, the budget, and the day-to-day budget is being contained and not exceeding what it would have been if we'd left things as they are. That's what I'm trying to get to.
So again, I think there's too many sort of variables as to what property they might have been in before. So if they were in a dispersed property that was run through GCH, it's completely different. The amount of money that we'd have to pay for it is completely different than whether it's a B&B or hotel. And again, the B&B, whether we use a travel lodge, which is far more expensive than a sort of a private B&B. So I think there's too many variables when it comes to the costings to be able to give you like an exact figure on paper. I might be able to get you sort of maybe a range, but again, that range I don't think you probably want it because it's going to go from sort of 0 to 100. It's not really going to show you very much, I don't think. But the overall picture is to reduce the temporary accommodation budget down. But yeah, I can't see a way to get you that figure exactly how you're sort of wanting it.
That figure, last attempt from me on this question, is that the sort of figure that as a lead member you would want to know about, that you want to see?
Yeah, so I'd want to see the big picture, how much we're spending on temporary accommodation. I wouldn't particularly necessarily want to see exactly per property, exactly how much we're wanting for. But the big picture, yes, that is the figures that I'd want. And that is the figures we get. We know we spend around about £1 million a year on temporary accommodation, but to have it down into per property, I wouldn't have that.
Okay, I apologise if I didn't make myself very clear. I wasn't after the cost per property. I was after the cost overall of the scheme. At some stage, will you have that information, or will somebody have it?
Yes, yeah, at some point, yeah.
That'd be interesting to see, wouldn't it? I think it would be anyway. I'm getting notes of approval around the chamber. That would be an interesting figure to see. I think it's a really good scheme, and I think it seems to be running well. But the two drivers were better accommodation, and we would all support that, but also budget containing, being in control of the budget, which at the moment we're not seeing, are we? Because the information is not being collated in a form that would enable us to understand what it was.
Yeah, so I think the reason why I can't give you that information right now is that we're still in the stages of purchasing the properties.
Oh no, I get that.
And they're not all full. So maybe if I come back again, once they are all full, we've got a bit more data to use, I can probably give that information. But based on what we currently got, I can't.
No, that's a fair comment. And we look forward at some stage to getting that. So my second question goes back to about an hour ago when Howard asked a question about single people on the waiting list and what priorities they got. You'll know from a question that I put to you at Cabinet that I've been taking an interest and look at the position of veterans, single veterans, because the Forces Charities told me in my role as lead member for the Armed Forces on Gloucestershire County Council. There is a unique difficulty in getting help for veterans who are single, particularly single men. And I just wondered if this scheme will help them in any way in terms of priorities. The problem, as I understand it, that I think we've identified, is that there are charities which look after veterans on the basis that when they house them, it will be on a temporary basis. But when it comes to Home Seeker and all of the other people looking at allocations, they're told you're adequately housed, you don't get a very high banding. And that's where there's a logjam. And I've been talking to other people in the district housing, in the district council housing departments to see how we break that. It's something that SAFA, for example, Social Sailor Air Force Association, are very concerned and worried about because there is a serious issue with the rehousing of veterans when they're considered to be adequately housed. But that might be accurate on paper, but they are adequately housed, but they're adequately housed in accommodation, which is move-on accommodation for veterans, not permanent homes. And that's where the logjam is, and it's quite serious. So maybe I'll put another question to you at Cabinet, see if the position's improved. But it's something that I am, and I'm sure everybody is concerned about, the position of our veterans, particularly single men who seem to bear the brunt of it at the moment. So, and you know, there was a serious point there, although I sort of lobbed in veterans, but is there anything you can do as the lead member to help unblock this this hold-up we have with some of the organisations where the veterans are deemed to be, in inverted commas, adequately housed, albeit in temporary accommodations? Sorry.
So it depends on where the veterans will be coming from. So you've got the move-on accommodation, but whether it's agreed move-on and whether it's through the channels that we would normally recognise, whether it's through sort of county council, like normal supported accommodation. So it depends on where they're coming through as to what sort of priority we would give them. The priority need when it comes to homelessness is the same across the board, so they'll be given priority need if they're eligible for it. The Home Seeker Plus policy will also give them a priority banding based on their housing need. So if they are adequately housed, it would be a sort of a lower band. They do already get sort of an enhanced level of support through the Home Seeker Plus policy. That's recently been amended, so the 5-year cap is now sort of removed from there. Any finances that they also get is discounted, whereas if somebody else comes on with, I don't know, let's say £50,000 or something in their pot, it would be taken into consideration. So the armed forces do get sort of an enhanced package through that. But yeah, it is a concern. I think we are doing everything we can, I think reasonably do. When you look at the sort of statistics, I think, which we've already given you, I think it's positive. That on paper, at least, we don't seem to have that many coming through. That doesn't mean that there aren't sort of the hidden homelessness that there probably are. So there may be a piece of work to do just to try and unpick that a little bit to see if we are missing anything. But generally speaking, I'm fairly happy with how we're dealing with armed veterans.
It'd be really helpful, thank you. So happy to go around a second time, so we won't round. We start here, so we'll go the other way, okay? So another Chambers, but Stephanie Chambers first. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. And this leads on from what somebody else was saying. Sorry, I can't remember. So I recall from my time in the position that Gloucester's reason for homelessness was slightly different to the national trend. And the reason being back in 2023, and I don't know if that's still the case, was that we had a much higher average of eviction from supported living, and also people leaving institutions such as prisons, and then also people required to leave asylum accommodation. And now it's the age-old thing that what kind of preventative work is being done within these industries? Because I know there's lots of organisations within Gloucester that work with the prisons. We have good support networks. People, other supported living companies buy up our properties because it's financially good for them. But what are we doing amongst our, at least our Gloucestershire housing partnership and further afield, to make sure we're not bearing the brunt of it and our taxpayers in Gloucester aren't paying more than their fair share just because we're favoured as a city that is welcoming? Are we still working with the other districts to try and make them take their fair share of the financial implication, but also to spread people across Gloucestershire to make it fair and equal for everybody?
Yes, so we do work across boundaries, which obviously you know about. We do have the housing partnership team, which work in, among other things that they do, is partly with migration. Gloucester has been a bit of, like I said, easy pickings, I think, because of the lower house prices and also all of the services are here. So I think it's sort of this natural draw that I do find slightly frustrating sometimes with some of the neighbouring authorities. Is sort of a bit of sort of shoving it out, which is a bit more than a bit annoying. It doesn't really work well for partnership working. When I think Gloucestershire as a whole, as a package, we sort of pride ourselves on doing partnership working very well. So when these sort of things come up, it's a bit of a stumbling block for us. The team is working actively with the neighbouring authorities, but more so with the Home Office to try and make them understand about the draw that's coming here and the pressure that we've been put under. My understanding is that within the southwest, I think we're the largest migrationary sort of draw, and we've been heavily pushing back on saying that we can't take any more of our sort of allocation because of the numbers of homelessness that we've got here in itself. So there is work being done, but it's not an easy answer, and it's not an easy. There's no really easy solution either.
Yeah, thank you. Because I know these are old figures, but you know, when I was looking at 2023, we were owing a duty to 201, and the next nearest was Stroud at 77. So we, for homeless figures, yeah. So it just is frustrating, and you know, we want to be a welcoming city, and I'm not saying we shouldn't be. I'm just saying maybe it needs to be shared a bit better. Thank you.
So when it comes to homelessness, you need to have the local connection. So that's one of the big draws, is that if we have a local connection to Gloucester, then the duty does rest with us. I think that's probably a reason to help our residents more, because we do have a duty rather than sort of making it perceived that we're sort of pushing them away to other areas. One thing that I'm trying to achieve, which should hopefully be a cabinet paper at some point, is what I'm currently calling the Gloucester offer, which is sort of an enhanced prevention package, looking at not just sort of rent in advance and deposit, but more of that sort of wraparound support, and if it's parental eviction, learning why they're being evicted and maybe do other preventative measures, whether mediation, which I think you've mentioned at full council before. And I've got sort of a long list of different things that I'm trying to work on. The homeless prevention grant this year, well, for the next financial year, was elevated by £500,000. That said, half of it is ring fenced for preventative measures, and that does cause a little bit of a sticking point when it comes to temporary accommodation. So that's why, because we can't use it for half of it, we can no longer use for temporary accommodation. So that's why I'm trying to get this Gloucester offer sort of off the ground in order to really change the curve when it comes to homelessness in the city. So we're doing more preventative first approach, rather than at the moment it's sort of crisis management and just putting as many people in temporary accommodation, although that sounds quite bad, but that's sort of essentially what it is, sort of, and then there's no sort of exit strategy. So if you don't sort of sort out the prevention to start with, and you're just having people in temporary accommodation with no exit strategy, it's causing yourself a nightmare. So hopefully you'll see that coming through at some point.
Hey, Councillor, you okay? Okay, so I'll go down this room. Nobody's for a certain time, apart from Councillor Condor. Oh, sorry, I can't see whose hand moved. Yours. Yeah, okay, oh, okay, you're a bit slow now today. Okay, so let's do it in order. So, Linda.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. I just wondered when a family come to you and they've been made homeless, do you take into consideration the income of the family, how much they're earning? Does that come into it at all?
No. When somebody comes through as homeless, the income doesn't have any effect. The only time it does have an effect is if we need to put them into temporary accommodation, then they might not be eligible for housing benefit, which most people would be that come through homelessness. So there'd be a potential that they need to pay for their own accommodation. That doesn't mean we don't have a duty to them if they have a priority need. That still remains regardless of income.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I should have said at the start, really, look, the bottom line is this is a good scheme. Yeah, it solves lots of issues. It finds housing for people, and obviously it makes a reduction on the budget. So thanks for that. And I'm really pleased to see that 8 of these properties are actually in Moorland Ward, the ward that myself and Councillor Chambers Debuse represent, which suggests to me that Moorland must be a really good place to live. Would it be possible, and is there any reason why ward councillors shouldn't be aware of the properties concerned here? Could you tell us, not here, but, discreetly where those properties are in each of our wards, really? Because I think it would be probably helpful to know, although I appreciate there may be legal reasons why we shouldn't. That's not to say who is living there, but where are the properties?
Yes. So I've agreed with so we discussed whether ward members should be made aware of the mobilisation of the properties, and it was agreed that we'd email out all ward members if they're in their own patch. So everybody who, as soon as they get mobilised, not necessarily purchased, but as soon as we're going to start using them, the ward members have been notified. And I believe you've been notified as well, because I got copied into an email of the properties. Yeah, so yeah, you do know.
Brett, can we just get some legal advice on that? That'd be really helpful. Thanks.
Well, I think what the Cabinet member has said is that you actually have that information already. The key is not to allow that to get into the public domain, because obviously there are safety concerns. But in terms of your right to know as ward members, I imagine you've met the threshold and that's why you've been given the information.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thanks, Terry. Angela? Thanks, Judy.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm trustee, as is Councillor Radley, of a local charity which provides various types of housing for the elderly, mostly 60 plus. And we see applications from members of the public.
What's your definition of elderly again?
Sorry?
What was your definition of elderly?
Well, 60 plus.
Well,
Shut up.
Okay.
Never mind, sorry to interrupt.
Okay. And we see applications from individuals who would like to have a home provided by this charity. And in the last year or so, I've noticed that quite a few of these people have been ejected from their rented accommodation. it's, I mean, in one case, I think it was somebody who'd been in their home for over 40 years, rented, and they were, you know, presumably the house was going to be sold. So I'm thinking about, so we've talked about adapting properties, but I'm thinking that in the future, knowing how variable and secure or insecure private rented accommodation can be, we know that a lot of landlords are deciding to sell some of their properties. There is a strong possibility, I suggest, that some of these more elderly, more mature adults are going to be finding themselves homeless. And if this particular local charity can't help, and, you know, not everybody knows about that charity, they will be throwing themselves on the mercy of the city council. So we need to bear in mind that it's going to be elderly people, maybe not able to deal with stairs, maybe needing wider doorways and so on, needing a smaller garden to look after, but nevertheless a little bit of private garden space. So, you know, a flat wouldn't necessarily be what they would aspire to if they were able to buy somewhere for themselves. So can you take on board that, you know, I'm predicting an increase in applications from people over 60-ish needing suitable accommodation for their later years. So that's the first thing. And also I think Councillor Stephanie Chambers said we had figures of people being required to leave supported living. I'm thinking that in my ward, we have people in supported living accommodation who have actually been placed there by authorities out of the county, which obviously is very negative for those people and for their families, because their families are faced with quite a long journey if they wish to visit. And I'm thinking about what happens to those people who've left supported living, who maybe don't belong to Gloucestershire. Do we have a dialogue with their original home authority in order to ensure that they maybe can go to an area that's closer to their family and their origins? Thank you.
Yeah, so when it's difficult because yes, Gloucester seems to be the draw that everybody sort of comes here. We do have dialogues to try and move people back when it sort of goes through the system, but it's not particularly easy, and largely it's outside of our control to a certain degree. Simply because it is a local authority and they're just sort of using our housing essentially because it's cheaper to be here, which is frustrating. But the housing team does have dialogue with them, and we do work with the other local authorities. When you mentioned about the older person accommodation, when it comes to the new builds and any sort of new developments, there's stipulation in there within the policy that we need to build a certain amount to M42 and M43 standards, whether that's adaptable or sort of wheelchair accessible, sort of two broad sort of definitions. So that's already in there for any sort of new builds that are coming through. My personal view on flats is that I want to see more sort of masonette style flats rather than the traditional sort of 3-4 story flats, for the simple purpose of it creates your own front door. The lower floor could be sort of maybe wheelchair accessible, but it also provides that personal private outdoor space for each person rather than sort of a block, and it also reduces any sort of service charges. So I think those sort of things would be ideal for older people. And like I said, with the masonette idea, it's sort of thinking outside the box and not just giving them a flat, which, like I said, people might not want, but giving them a broad range of options.
Councillor. Anybody else? Yep, Councillor.
How many remain requiring housing?
Okay. 10 have been housed in the last 12 months. And we have 79 on home seekers, and 17 of them have been on there for over 3 years. But again, with a caveat for over 3 years, it depends on what their priority for housing. It could have changed during that time, but they've just been on the waiting list for that long. But in the last 12 months, it's been 10 housed.
Yeah, and just another thing on that is if they've been in the army, say, or the forces for some time, and they've been living away where they've been serving or whatever, what are the criteria for them to be able to come back and be housed in Gloucester?
So the local connection criteria sort of gets taken away, essentially. And the priority elements also gets taken away to be given that sort of armed forces. So it previously said those currently serving or having served within the immediate preceding 5 years. Now that's changed to those who are currently serving or have previously served at any time. So it's a lot more broad now. So they can come back.
And we're signed up to the Armed Forces Covenant, aren't we, as a city council? And that's really important. Okay, cool. So, Kate, anything? Okay, so last time, Councillor Chambers, nothing, thank you. Angela? That's cool, go for it.
Yeah, thanks for saying about the masonettes. Being obviously the Matson councillor, and quite predominantly, there's quite a lot of masonettes. Issues are that I think need to be thought out of is the demises of the front garden and back garden. There's a lot of arguments between whose garden's which. There's never been set out. You've got somebody that takes care of their garden and somebody doesn't give a hoot about it, and then you've got issues there. Also, animals, cats, dogs. You've got some that just literally open their door, let the dog go out, they go and poo in somebody's part of the garden that they manage, don't pick it up, and the dog goes back in. So that's something that needs some careful consideration about plotting out the garden areas. But yeah, going on to my question. So page 33, property 2. Is this one of the properties the council have refurbished? Or is this one that you've just been handed? Page 33, property 2. Oh, is this one of the properties the council's refurbished, or has the council bought this property? Sorry.
It has been refurbished, and it was, like I said, it was one for disposal, but that's the one that's currently being used.
Okay. The bathroom says, if you go on to page 35, bathroom and adapted shower room, and there's been quite a lot of questions around disabled shower rooms. Is this classed as a disabled shower room, or is that just classed as an ambulant one?
I wouldn't have that level of technical detail, but I can probably find out for you.
No problem, just about observations, because if it's classed as where it says adapted, if it's classed as a disabled one, it's non-compliant in several ways, so just thought you might want to take note of that. It doesn't meet Part D, threshold, and it's not DDA compliant for several reasons, but I can go into them. Also, something else to bear in consideration if it is a property aimed for disabled people. Also, it says adapted shower, so I presume the case to get 2 types of disabled, obviously wheelchair and also ambulant that might have a slight restriction. The kitchen's also not compliant as well for Part M, so it's worth trying to figure out what's been going on with the properties, because although they're saying adapted, they're not. And then if we go on to property number 1, it's 1930s property. You can tell by the doors and the following page, which shows the street scene being a 1930s property. I'd look in the page 30 when you've got the living room, dining room, you can see Artex on that ceiling. Houses of that age containing Artex are more than likely asbestos in Artex, so it'd be worth getting that sampled, taking a sample of the Artex and having that done for testing. It's not much, you're looking about 60 quid for a test, but it'd be best just to make sure, because it looks like it's just been painted over. Cheers, thank you.
as far as I'm aware at the moment, all properties, they've all been inspected and they're all up to regulations. I can, of course, we'd also check if needs be, but I'm fairly sure they're all up to regs.
Yeah, that's correct. I think the clarification point on the DDA compliance under the building regs in 2010 and the Housing Act is probably what I think Councillor Chambers is referring to, and it's a good point. So we just need to check that to see what level of adaptability is being assigned to that property. And just on the architects, if it has got architect ceiling, it probably is a good use of sampling, because it probably, depending on when it was deviated, it's likely to be white cryostyle if it was going to be in there. But obviously, we will sample it, because there's obviously different types of asbestos that you can have, and typically in buildings of that nature in Artex you'd find white cryostyle. So we can do a sample test on that, but important to probably note at this point that in many houses, including my own, Artex is perfectly safe until it's obviously demolished or taken down. But a sample test is 60 quid, so I'm sure it's not a big issue to do that. We need to check what adaptability level was given in, because obviously if adaptability could come in different forms depending on the accessibility nature of the building. So the point earlier on was, how far do you go in terms of making a property accessible? Is it a DDA compliant ramp that allows access into the property? Is it something to enable stair lifts, etc.? So we just need to go back to the original prospectus and see what that was.
Okay. Good, thanks. Anybody? Angela, Louise?
It's Anne, but that's all right. So if I may, Chair, so slight confusion before. It's a plug really for the point I raised earlier around the food strategy, because and looking and going back to that food strategy, because there is an overlap in the way that some people in the temporary accommodation are looking at feeding themselves and how that impacts. I've been told, and I spoke with a lady who had a horrific story, because she was in temporary accommodation, she was attempting to provide for herself nutritious, low-cost food. This was a couple of years back, and it meant to her losing her place and having no recourse to public funds, and the resulting challenges that led to her. So I would very be keen for us to go back to that food strategy and see how it maps to the needs here and the actions that we're kind of taking. You mentioned some of the preventative work that's happening. I had a really interesting conversation with Emmaus, because they've reached similar conclusions in their work to try and reduce homelessness, is that they're now putting in a range of accommodation to try and reduce the risk. I was wondering if those sorts of conversations are things that the City Council is engaging with, similar to Councillor Chambers, in terms of perhaps shaping ideas within the city.
It's all part of the cabinet plan with the sort of Gloucester offer that I'm referring to. So conversations are being had. I went to the team meeting with officers last week and very much sort of plugged this new sort of model, a new way of working, because it is a complete shift from sort of the last 5 years. And they're very much wanting to be engaged, because their comments were that they're the ones that are on the front line dealing with it day in, day out. Us as councillors can sort of say so many things, but unless we're doing it on the front line, we don't really truly know exactly what's coming through the door. So they wanted to have a sort of a working group in order to get the best out of it. So yes, engaging with either officers at the council or external stakeholders is all part of the plan, and yes, it's being done.
Thank you very much.
Cool. Finally, Louise, anything?
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on a point probably vaguely connected to the food strategy and also what Councillor Chambers raised earlier. I know, because the food bank does every week do food parcels for the people who are in the temporary accommodation, and I know that they're very basic, as Councillor Chambers says. It's tins of cold meat and vegetables, packets of pot noodles and so on. But the trouble is, that's not the fault of the food bank if you're in a temporary accommodation with just a kettle, which I think, as you confirmed, often is the situation. Obviously, it's extremely limited, unfortunately, what you can supply people. And that's why, again, it's another reason for the sooner you can get people out of the hotel accommodation, the better.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Thanks. So I think that's a wrap, as they say somewhere else, not here. So we're now going to move on to the next item on our agenda, which is our work planning. So can I thank both of you for attending? Can I thank in particular the Cabinet members for patiently for an hour and a half just answering a barrage of questions, mostly from your own group, you'll see. We're a very non-political committee. So, yeah, cheers. Thank you so much. And Alistair, it's
Can I
going to be
just
very
say
brief.
about just really, really good. It's really nice to see
Yeah,
somebody who knows their portfolio and was needing the officer's help and like literally at all. So, as I say, really, really good. Thanks, Luke. Amazing. Thank you very much, Andrew.
No, so not only thank you for what you've done today, but obviously you've done some good preparation coming to before coming to the meeting. So that just, yeah, really courteous. We ought to run this as an example for other Cabinet members on how to attend scrutiny. We'll keep that up our sleeve. Okay.
And
Cheers,
Chair, I'd
guys.
just like to add, there were 3 properties we owned before this, and through this, we've got so many more, which is really, really helping people. So thank you for that.
Yeah, agreed. Cheers, Luke. Thank you, Andy. Thank you very much. We'll move on to our next item then. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're on the work planning programme. Any comments or questions that we didn't cover off in our pre-meeting? Take that as a no. Oh, Steph, sorry.
Sorry, and that's my fault for not getting to the pre-meet on time, isn't it? I just noticed a couple of things as I was going through the work plan. We don't have a date for the POSMED. Is that because we're still waiting for the planning, the POSMED? Okay, just wanted to check that one. And then there was something else I just saw in a second. Yeah, there wasn't a date on the asset management strategy, so I just wondered when that would be coming as well.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I will double check on the date of the asset management strategy. It's been on the work programme for some time. Last I checked, it hadn't been allocated a date on the forward plan yet. I think it's still on the date TBC on the forward plan, but I will double check and advise members when it's likely to come so we can put it on the corresponding ONS committee date.
Okay. Steph, Councillor. Okay, Alistair.
Yes, I see there's some really big stuff coming up in Cabinet, glyphosate, the camping, unauthorised camping, SIL, and then you've got also the disposal of Westgate Street. Do you know if these, this disposal to sell off freehold property, do we know if that's temporary accommodation or if what that building is, or is that just the one that used to be used for the gateway? Yeah. I was just checking the 92 to 96 if that was the old council gateway that's being sold.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. So I believe that is that is the properties being referred to. Cabinet papers are published tomorrow, so those reports are going to April Cabinet. We've missed the boat for them to come to scrutiny now, but yeah, they'll be published tomorrow, so members will have access to all the information then.
Clear on that, because there's some quite big things coming up there. Is it Cabinet decision on those final, or does it go to scrutiny, or does it go to council? Is it just these are just final items?
I believe they're all cabinet decisions, yes, and they will be coming up to the next cabinet meeting in April. So you can go along to cabinet, ask questions on them.
Just one quick thing. When did all those appear on the forward plan? Because I don't know how much time we've had to be able to look at that and call those in or anything. I don't know how long they were on the forward plan for.
I will double check when they first appeared. This latest forward plan is slightly out of date because some of the reports are being deferred as well. The unauthorised camping one, I understand, is coming to a later cabinet meeting. So I'll double check when they first appeared, but this forward plan was published on the 11th of March, so it is slightly out of date.
Chair, would you consider looking at the unauthorised camping? Because I just wanted to know what that entails and if there's a crossover with rough sleeping, because that's quite a tricky thing to look at. I just wondered if there's anything the committee wanted to look at.
what we need to.
Yeah, we agreed. We've got some nodding around the table. So if you can make a note of that, please, something we'd like to look at. Are we there? Are we there? Are we there? Are we there? I take that as a yes. So thank you very much for turning up. Exactly an hour and a half. That's pretty spot on. We didn't have to go for a extra half an hour. And thank you, everybody, for the questions. And thanks for the thought that went into them. And thank you, Shazia, for turning up and seeing how we work. Thank you. Cheers, everybody. Safe journey home.